All right, so yeah, so we've basically wrapped up all of the official curriculum at this point. And the last little bit is going to be showing you how to Dockerize and deploy a React application. So far we've done this, repeatedly with databases, with APIs, with an API and a database. But the end goal of this is to deploy an application which has three main components: a web server, which is going to be responsible for your front end, an API, and a database. And we will package all these up into a containerized application, and all of these containers will be able to interact with each other. Ultimately, you'll have all three containers running on an EC2 instance, and then your client will just hit the API, and everything will go through the Nginx container. So that'll be the entrance point. That'll be what routes all the requests everywhere else. But in order to do that, we have to get a web server up. So I'm going to start with this dummy React application. So I'll get that running locally real quick, just to make sure that that is working. So let's see. It's down. Okay, and we can take a look. It's just a very simple application. It's just got it uses React Router. It's just got two pages, and the pages don't really do anything interesting, but just to show that that exists. In the package.json, you can see that we're using React and React Router. All right, so to run this, I have to install everything to get the node modules locally, and then I'll run npm run dev. So npm install to cd. Yeah, got my node modules now. npm run dev. Okay, so it's just got a nav bar with two routes. So that is working. So that's what we do for local development, right? But when we actually want to deploy it, we can't just run the dev server, right? That's not gonna cut it. So ultimately, we need to take all of this React code and package it up into something that browsers understand, and browsers don't know about React. They just know about JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. So to do that, to kind of package everything up, take all of your React code and transform it into JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, we are going to run a command build. So there's an alias for this command in the package.json file to be build. So we can run npm run build, and it will in turn execute build. So what happens when we do that? Npm run build. It creates this dist folder right here. So dist for distribution, depending on what system you're using, it might be called build or something else, but this is the end product that you're going to end up serving up to clients. And you can see that there's an index.html. and it's just a normal HTML page, and it has this div called root. So this is exactly like what we have over here. Basically the exact same thing because it's HTML, so it doesn't have to really transform it. What's going to be different is the JavaScript. So this is your React application, which looks like a bunch of junk because it's been basically optimized for transmission. So it's minified, it's small. A lot of the functions and stuff get renamed. But this is your entire application here. So if we want to actually run this, I mean, there's a few things we could do, but I'm going to show how we can put this inside a web server and then let the web server in turn serve that up. All right, so in order to do that, we need a web server. So we're going to use Nginx. There are a few major web servers, Nginx, Apache, stuff like that. We'll use Nginx. So let's go ahead and go to the official Docker image page. And you can take a look at that. So there's a whole bunch of versions, as you might expect. And then there's a README, and it tells you, here's just a basic example. So Docker run, and then you can give it an optional name. And then what's the -v flag for?
Is it to create a volume?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So there are multiple ways to create a volume. We've done that in the Docker compose file, but you can also do it on the command line as like a one-off thing. So here we're creating a volume and we're mapping whatever this directory is on our local host machine. So /some/content, just an example. And then we're going to map that to some path in the container. In this case, user share Nginx HTML. And then there's also this RO. Does anyone take a guess what that might be for? So this is optional, and it stands for read only. So we're basically gonna restrict file permissions here, but you don't need to do that, but just to let you know that that's there. And then the -d flag is to run as a background process, and then Nginx is the name of the container. So in this case, it's this here. And then Nginx is its own thing, so it has its own way that it expects to run by default. And here's an example Docker file. This is a very simple Docker file, and it just like every Docker file, it starts with a from line. So you start with a base image, so from Nginx, and then we're going to copy, and this is static HTML directory. So this ultimately is going to be whatever that build command outputs. So we have our React application, and it's going to spit out HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And Nginx, by default, will expect you to put that right here. The user share Nginx HTML. This has nothing to do with Docker. This is just how Nginx will run by default. There are ways to configure this differently, but this is the default. Okay. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to pull down the Nginx container, and we can take a look inside it. So I'm going to do Docker run Nginx. Actually, I'm going to port map. So -p and 8090, let's say. So by default, Nginx is going to listen on port 80 for HTTP traffic, and I'm going to map that to my local machines 8090, and then Nginx. Okay, so when you do the Docker run command, if it doesn't find this image locally, it will automatically pull it down. So I could have run Docker pull Nginx first and then run this command Docker run, or if you don't have it, it'll implicitly pull it before it tries to run. Okay, so this should be running now. I'm going to go to another terminal here and do Docker PS, and I can see that this Nginx container is actually running. So I should be able to go to localhost 8090 and see what happens. Okay, and I get this default Nginx HTML. We can look at that. Oops. Not what I wanted to do. And I'll refresh this and we can take a look. So here we can see the request. I'm making a GET request to localhost 8090, and the response is an HTML document. So where did this HTML document come from? We can go inside the container and try to figure that out. So I'm going to exec into this container and we'll look around it in the file system. So Docker exec, because the container is running, so I'm going to basically SSH into this running container. So Docker exec -IT, so I want to attach to the terminal, and I'll provide it the container, and then the command that I want to run is going to be bash. Okay, so now I've basically SSH'd into this container, so I can see what's in the file system. All right. So if we look at the example, where's that? The example documentation, you can see that right here, the default example expects you to mount something to this path inside the container, and that same path right here in the Docker file. So there must be something special about this this directory. So user share nginx HTML. So let's see what's in there. cd/user something user share. And you can see HTML nginx. Oops. So I just executed that command. So user cd share, and then finally cd HTML. And you can see that there's this index.html. So let's take a look at what that HTML document is. So I can cat index.html, and here's the HTML document. So it says, welcome to Nginx. And if I look here, welcome to Nginx. So this is that actual HTML document. So you can see that by default, Nginx will take in a request. It's going to listen on port 80 in its local environment. When it gets a request, it's going to say, hey, you must want whatever HTML document is in user share nginx HTML. And it's going to return that to the client. Okay, so we don't want this default document. We want our own web page now to get served. So how do we do that? There's a couple ways to do it. But we're going to create a Docker file, and we'll just copy whatever we have here into that Docker file. So I'm going to create Docker file. And I'm going to stop this server. And this Docker file, I can basically just copy exactly what's in the documentation here. I'm going to start from this Nginx image, and I want to copy. Well, what do I want to copy? I basically want to copy whatever's in this dist folder. So I'm going to copy /dist into this. All right, so let's see what happens when I build this. So I'm going to run Docker build, and I can give it a name, but I'm not going to do that. So Docker build dot. Okay, let's see. Where's my doc? Okay. All right, so I got my Docker file here now. So I'm going to run Docker build. Okay, so now I should have an image. I'm just going to check that that exists. So Docker images, and should have that image. I should have given it a name. But yeah, this is going to be it. Okay, so I have this image. So now I'm going to go ahead and run it. So Docker run, and I'm going to map so -p, and I'll do 8090 again to port 80, and I'll run that image. Okay, so Docker ps. So this should be running. So I'm going to go ahead and exec into this running container again. So Docker exec -it container bash. And this time, if I cd into user, I keep forgetting this directory name, user share Nginx HTML, I can see that I now have my stuff that I want in here. So this index.html should be, it should override, when you copy it in, it should override the default. So now if I go here, I'll refresh this, do a hard refresh, and you can see this is our app now. So we're serving up our React application now from an actual web server, not just the local development server. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, so now I'm going to do a couple other things. One is, let's say, I've been developing this React application and I'm happy with it now. It's ready to go. I want to push it to prod to get it out, get it out into the real world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this image and I'm going to push it up to my Docker Hub account. So right now, I have the Docker file defined and I have my application, but it's really just local. If I want other people to be able to just run this image as is, I need to push it up to Docker Hub. So I'll do Docker images again. And there's a couple of things you can do. One is when you build it, you can give it a name, but I'm gonna you can also tag it afterwards. So it's command Docker tag, and I'll tag let me see what the command is for that. So Docker tag source image and then colon tag. Okay, so let's do that. So Docker tag whatever this is. And then you need to give it, you need to prefix your image name with your Docker Hub username. In this case, Chad Mowbray / React Docker. All right, okay, so this is actually a two-part command. Let's do that. Okay, so now if I do Docker images, so I just basically renamed this this image. So once I have that, I should be able to push this up to Docker Hub. I can do Docker push and then the image name. Okay, so at this point, any one of you should be able to run Docker pull Chad Mowbray / React Docker and get it on your local machine. I can go into my Docker Hub account and I should be able to see that there. So React Docker right here. Okay, so now that image is available on Docker Hub, I should be able, like anyone, because this is a public repository, anyone around the world should just be able to run Docker pull Chad Mowbray / React Docker and can get that image down. So now what we're going to do is we're going to deploy this image. I'm going to go to AWS and I'm going to create an EC2 instance. So we'll launch instance. Right, I'll go with all the defaults here. Key pair, I think I have something lying around. Yeah, sshp.pem. If you don't, you can just create a new one. And then you can either create a security group, which is fine. So you just need to allow SSH traffic and then the HTTP traffic. So SSH is port 22. That allows you to SSH in and install Docker and all that other kind of stuff. And then HTTP is for other people to access. So I'm going to select an existing one because I have a million of these lying around. Let's see. That one should be fine. And I'm going to launch instance. All right. You can watch that spin up. Okay, and then to actually SSH in, once this is ready, I should be able to go in here. So we'll copy this. So from my desktop, I'm just going to exit this, stop this container. Yes. And now I'm inside of my EC2 instance. Okay, so once I'm inside my EC2 instance, I'm going to need to install Docker. So let me find the script for that. I think I have it over here. There's a few places where this command lives. Let's see. Yeah, do this. All right, so this is just the install Docker command. Okay, so now I can do Docker XP. Okay, so this is installed. All right, so I want to run this Nginx container on this EC2 instance so that other people can go to the web page. So to do that, I'm going to pull the image. So I can do Docker pull, and then I just pull the image name. So cat Mowbray slash React Docker. So because it's a public repository, I don't need any credentials, I can just pull it down. And if I do Docker images, I can see that it's sitting right here. Okay, so last step is to actually run this image. So Docker run, and then this time I'm going to map port 80 because I need people to come into the container on port 80 because that's the rule that I configured. So on this EC2 instance, I'm allowing traffic into port 80. So I'm going to map port 80 to Nginx's port 80. So 80, 80. And then I just need the name. Okay, so that is running. So I should be able to now, if I copy this, so I'm not getting any response. And you know, once you have a little bit of experience with AWS, so there's no error, unfortunately, it's just a silent, it's hanging. So that probably means there's an issue with a security group. Probably means that whatever I'm doing, I'm not allowed to do. So I'm gonna go, so since I picked a random security group and I didn't double check what the actual permissions were, I'm gonna have to go actually look at that now. So I'm gonna go to security and I'm gonna look at the security groups. So here's my security group right here. So what's the problem?
It looks like you're not allowing traffic in.
Yeah, exactly. So what kind of traffic am I allowing in right now?
Just SSH.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So I was able to spin up the instance and then SSH in and do everything. But this security group, I picked up again, I picked a random one. I thought that, this one, like almost all of the ones I have lying around, do have port 80 exposed, but this one doesn't. So if you run into that situation where, it's just kind of hanging, you're not getting an error or anything, that's probably what it is. So you can go here and you can edit the inbound rule, and I'm going to add a rule, and I'm going to say, I'll just allow all traffic for now. I'll save this rule. So now basically, I'm accepting this is overly permissive, but all you need is port 80 in this case. All right, so now if I go back here, it works. So my EC2 instance now will accept traffic on port 80, and there we go. So this should work exactly the same. Okay, so we have a deployed React application running behind an actual web server. Any questions about that? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna spin this down. Okay, so I'm gonna spin this down. So that's how you do it. We've kind of seen this process over and over again, but that's this, this other minor variation. This is how you do it with a React application. What I'm going to show you now is purely optional. It's just for exposure. But I'm going to show you how to do the same thing, but with Terraform. So you can see that how we've created our cloud infrastructure here has been entirely manual. We go into AWS, we log into the console, we click around, we want to create something, we go through this process and fill out the form and blah, blah, blah. And because we only have one EC2 instance that we care about, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're a DevOps engineer or something for a large company with complex applications, this kind of manual stuff, one, it's extremely tedious if you have hundreds of services and stuff you have to manage with different roles and permissions and network configurations and blah blah blah. It's just a huge thing. And one, it would be very tedious to kind of manage all that stuff by hand through the GUI. And two, it's also very error prone. It's very easy to forget to check a box or transpose something or whatever. So it just creates lots of problems. And then if someone forgets to check a box and then the application stops working, you have to go in, dig around, and figure out what's actually happening. So to mitigate some of that, there's something called Terraform, and there's a couple other similar things, but Terraform is the big one. And what Terraform allows you to do is to describe all of the cloud infrastructure that you want. To describe it in code, and then you can check it into version control. So you can check it into Git, and everyone can see here's what all of our cloud and here's the full description of all of our cloud infrastructure. So everyone knows what it is, and if anyone changes anything, then you update that and you push to GitHub, etc. So it's clear, it's consistent, and it also does a lot of other things that are nice. We won't get into all that. Okay, so how do we use this? So if you want to follow along or do this yourself, you're going to have to install a couple things. One is you have to install Terraform, and then two, you have to install the AWS CLI. So it's not that big of a deal, but that's what you have to do. And then once you do that, you're basically going to give you're going to give Terraform and the AWS CLI permission to act as you. So you're basically saying, like, I'm going to give you permission to act as me, and you can do stuff on my AWS account. So to do that, we're also going to need to basically create a credential that Terraform and the AWS CLI can use to act as us on AWS. So to do that, we'll go to IAM. So IAM is the basically identity and permission management thing. And we're basically just gonna grab a token. So we'll let AWS generate a token that we can use. So basically just like a JSON web token or username, password, whatever. It's just a credential. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna create, I didn't delete this, shouldn't delete it. That's fine. Okay, so you'll go in here and then you'll click create access key, and it'll probably give you a scary warning telling you not to create access keys for root users, which is good, but in this case, I don't want to go through the extra complication of creating a new user. And we're not doing anything that costs money, so it should be fine. All right, so I'm gonna go here, and now I can take a look at this. Let's see. Actually, maybe I'll just do this. I'll deactivate it. I'll create a new one. All right, cool. So I'm going to create a new key. Yes, I understand. It's not a good idea. Okay. So I'll just show this. I'm going to delete this immediately. So if I forget, please remind me because this will be on video. All right, so I have this access key and I have the secret. So now I have to use that to configure the CLI. I basically just have to inject this credential into the CLI so that it can use it. So here, you should be able to type AWS configure. This is assuming that you have the CLI installed already. So I'll go here. I can do AWS configure. And it's going to say, hey, give me your access key. We have that right here. Oops. And then the secret, which is right here. And then you can just use the default region, it doesn't matter. And then you don't have to worry about the output either. You can just press enter for those. Okay, so once you've done that, you basically given the credential to your AWS CLI. So I should be able to run AWS CLI commands now, like AWS S3 LS. I don't have any S3 buckets, so I don't get anything, but I also don't get an error. So I know that this is actually working. You can do AWS EC2. Let's see what commands are available here. Let's try. Oh. So this is called the man page or manual page. So here's a list of commands that I could run. And a whole lot. Let's see. All right, I'm just gonna do this on the internet because it's much faster. So AWS EC2 create instance CLI. Okay. So here's the documentation for the AWS CLI tool. So when we've been creating EC2 instances, we go into the AWS UI. Where is that? Yeah. So EC2. And then we, click around, fill out the form, etc. You can also do the same thing via the command line. Here's an example, create instance, and then here's a bunch of options that you can pass in. So let's see if there's an example command. That's EC2 create instance CLI example. Okay, so this is running the instance. Let's see. Describe. So I'll do, actually, I don't have any running right now. But let's try this command. Do I have a running? Shouldn't. Okay, so I have this terminated instance that's still around. So that's why I'm getting a result here. You can see it's just, you get back a JSON object that describes your EC2 instance. So under the hood, Terraform is going to use the AWS CLI. So you're going to describe your application using Terraform, Terraform language, and then it's going to translate what you write into AWS CLI commands and execute those to create all of the resources that you want. So let's look at that. Okay, so we're going to create this file, and we'll call it main.tf. We'll create it. Yeah, so in here, I'll create a new directory called Terraform. From there, I'll create a file called main.tf. So you can have lots and lots of files, but you have to have, at least you have to have one file called main.tf. All right, and so what is this? So Terraform, has like a core, Terraform core, and it also has a whole bunch of like plugins for different kinds of providers. So AWS is one provider. There's Azure. There's a dozen other providers. So you have to tell it which provider you want to use. So we're using AWS. So we just say AWS, and then you can create. There are different kinds of categories. There's resources. There's data. But here, this is a keyword, and it's resource. And then this right here is part of the AWS provider. So this is not just an arbitrary string. This is actually like a specific command. So I'll look that up just to show you. So Terraform. So here's the documentation for Terraform. And here's an example. So there's a data thing, which you don't need to worry about right now. And here's a resource tag. So in order to create an EC2 instance, you need to give it a couple things. Here, the AMI. The AMI is that basically like the image, or the machine image, like whether you're using Ubuntu in this case or whatever. In this case, it's grabbing it from this data. So data.aws AMI .ubuntu.id, which I think will actually that might be generated. And then the instance type, T3 micro, and whatever else. So there's a whole bunch of options that you can pass in. You don't need to really worry about that. We'll just see a minimal example. So the AMI, so I can actually go here and I can see, let's see if I can find the AMI. Details. So here's the AMI ID. So this is the Amazon Linux, whatever. So I'll just copy that in. Might be the same. They do change them periodically. So I'll just copy this. Okay. So here's the AMI that I want to use. I want to do T2 micro. This is the free tier one. You can also check. So the instance type, T2 micro. And then the key name that you want to use, let's see. Where is that? So the key, so in this case, I use the SSH key, so I'll just use the same one. So this file is actually called sshkey.pem, but you don't pass the file extension. And then a security group that you want to use. So let me find that security group actually. Security. It's not being used right now. Right, so if you want, so you can use Terraform to create all of these things, by the way. You can use Terraform to create a key pair, you can use it to create a security group, etc. But we're just going to use, to keep things simpler, we're going to use what we already have. So I'm going to go to the main EC2 console, and there should be a link to security groups. You could also just go here and let's check out security groups. There we go. And there's a whole bunch that I have lying around. Let's look at this one and just make sure that it has the permissions that we want. So we want it to be able to do HTTP on port 80 and SSH. This also allows all traffic. Maybe that's too permissive for us. So let's find another one. Maybe it's more restricted. Okay, so this one looks good. This just says HTTP and SSH. So that's what we want. I'm going to copy this security group ID. I'll paste that right here. Okay, so now I'm saying I want to create an EC2 instance that uses this Amazon Linux machine image. It's a T2 micro, and here's my credentials for SSHing in. And here are the permissions that I want it to have. I want it to accept traffic on SSH and HTTP. And then this line is actually optional, but the user data field will basically allow you to pass in a script that you can run when the instance is created. So because we know that we're going to want to install Docker, we can just say, hey, once you're up, install Docker. And then we can also add another line here that says to run this image. So install Docker and then start this container. So I'll do Docker run -p 8080, and that will be Chad Mowbray /React Docker. Okay. So now we have this, we have this configuration, we have this, this infrastructure, cloud infrastructure described in a document, and we can check this in to GitHub now. All right, so how do we actually, make this happen? So we're gonna have to cd into the Terraform. I'll run it in this other spot. Okay, so I'm in the Terraform directory. I should see my main.tf. So in order to actually execute this and to create the cloud resources that are described there, I'm going to first do Terraform init. So there are really just 3 Terraform commands that you need: Terraform init, Terraform plan, and Terraform apply. So the first thing you'll do is init. That'll just, Terraform will, init, just like every other init command. It's going to create some files and configuration and blah, 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 which you don't really need to worry about. And we'll see, if you look here, so there's, this .terraform directory with a bunch of stuff in it, which you don't need to worry about, and it's block file. So you shouldn't really need to mess with that at all. So that's what you get when you run Terraform init. And then you want to run Terraform plan. And Terraform plan is basically, Terraform is going to read through whatever Terraform code you have here, and it's also going to check it against your AWS account. And it's going to say, hey, here's all the cloud infrastructure that you want, and I want to make your AWS account match that. So that's really what Terraform is doing. You have this infrastructure described. I want to make your account match that. So if it doesn't match it, then it's gonna make it match. And if it does match, then it's can just do nothing. So that's another major reason why people use Terraform, because it's what's called idempotent. So if you create a resource and then you run the same command again, if the resource is already created, Terraform's going to see, hey, you've described, how you want your AWS cloud infrastructure to be. It's already like that, so I don't need to do anything. It's not just going to like keep creating the same thing over and over again. All right, so let's do Terraform plan. It's going to give you a bunch of output. Okay, so here's the output that it gives you. Terraform will perform the following actions. So it's going to create a resource. And that resource is going to have this AMI. We can check that. So 0B8, 0B8, that's the same one I just described here. And then there's some other properties which it doesn't know. We could also pass some of this stuff in, but it's gonna, like, you didn't tell me what to do, so I'm just gonna use the defaults. So it's basically gonna automatically generate all this other stuff. T2 micro instance, the SSH key, blah, blah, blah. And we didn't give it an IP, so it'll just create a random one as usual. And that's it. It's going to use this security key. So this looks right. So now I can say, it looks like what Terraform is intending to do is what I want to happen. So now I can actually execute this. And to do that, you do Terraform fly. So it's going to ask you to confirm. Yes. And now it's going to actually create that. So I'm going to go to the EC2 console, and we can see that this instance should be getting created now. So this is pending. So this is the one that's being created right now by Terraform. Okay, so Terraform is done creating all the infrastructure that we described. We can check that in the console. So that's great. And we should be able now to grab that IP address. And we should be able to go to the actual site now. Okay, so this is, oh, there we go. But there you go. So now we have, basically with one command, we've created our infrastructure and then implicitly run the application. So you can do, once you get everything the way you want it, you just execute it with one command and everything should just work. And the nice thing about this is that now I can stop it, right? So I can also do Terraform destroy. So Terraform destroy. And it will look at the same configuration you gave it, say, okay, I'm going to remove all of this stuff. So cleanup is a lot easier, especially when you have complicated applications. You can create a whole bunch of resources and then, you decide, oh, I'm done with this, but you forget to, turn off a couple EC2 instances somewhere, and now you're getting charged. So wait for this to destroy. I'm going to go back to the console. You can see that this is shutting down. Seconds. And once that's shut down, I'll go ahead and recreate it again, just so you can see. Okay, so this is shut down. I can confirm that here. But now I decide, you know what? Actually, I do want to spin this up. So Terraform apply. I could do Terraform plan and double check first, but I'm not going to do that. Yes. So now it's going to create an instance. So I can go back to the GUI here. And look, we got another one spinning up. This is going to be on this IP address. Okay. Now I should be able to go to this. It might take a second. Being impatient, but I should come up here. Because I gave it the extra Docker command to do all that stuff. There we go. So again, this should work exactly the same. So it just gives you like the whole point of Docker and Terraform tools like this is to make everything the same all the time. That's the whole goal. Okay. Yeah, so that is basically it. Are there any questions? I'm gonna spin this down. And I'm also going to delete that key. I am. Copy that, deactivate it, and delete it. So now no one can use that credential. Sorry, guys. All right. So that is it. I'm going to stop the recording.